Hey, welcome back, friend. Tonight, pull up your blanket, let your shoulders drop, unclench your jaw, and give the day permission to drift a little farther away. Settle in however feels easiest, because for the next little while, I want you to imagine the far north at the edge of evening, where the wind moves over dark water, where smoke from a turf-roofed house rises into cold air, and where one quiet question waits for you. When you picture the Viking Age, who do you think held the world together when the ships were gone? Most people are taught to answer with the men in dragon-prowed boats, the raiders, traders, settlers, and warriors, whose names seem to travel farther than the waves themselves. But that is not the real answer. The real answer is that very often the world of the North rested in the hands of the women who stayed behind, women who kept farms alive, households ordered, children fed, accounts remembered, cloth woven, marriages negotiated, and grief endured through the long stretch of years we now call the Viking Age, roughly from the late 8th century to the middle of the 11th, from about 793 to 1066, though the habits and heartbeats of that world reached beyond those dates. So tonight, instead of standing on the deck of a ship, you are going to stand in the doorway of the home it left behind. You are going to listen for the sounds that history usually lowers to a whisper. The creak of a chest opening, the clink of keys at a belt, the hiss of porridge over a fire, the soft thud of loom weights, the murmur of a prayer, half to Christ, half to older gods remembered in the bones. And before we go further, if you enjoy these quiet journeys through the past, you can leave a like, subscribe if you feel like staying a while, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time the night has found you there. I always like imagining these stories drifting into so many different rooms, across so many different time zones, because this story, gentle as it is, begins with a surprising truth. A Viking ship might vanish over the horizon in a single morning, but the life left behind did not pause for even a day. Cows still had to be milked, ale still had to be brewed, hay still had to be dried before weather turned, silver had to be hidden, servants watched, kin placated, and children told again and again that yes, perhaps father would return before winter, or perhaps after, or perhaps never. And if you listen closely, you can feel the center of gravity shifting away from the sea and toward the firelit longhouse, because that is where our night really begins. Now that you have stepped inside, let us stand for a moment in a prosperous household in western Norway around the year 900. The longhouse is perhaps 25 meters long, built of timber and turf, dim except where the hearth sends orange light up toward the smoke hole. The air smells of wool, ash, sour whey, damp leather, and the faint animal warmth that never fully leaves a farm. A woman named Ragnhild, let us call her that, moves through the room before sunrise. At her belt hangs a ring of keys. Simple metal, small objects, but not simple in meaning. In Viking Age graves, archaeologists have found keys buried with women, and those keys were not just practical tools, they were symbols of authority. The Old Norse word husfreyja, from hus, meaning house, and freyja, meaning lady, gives you something more than housewife in the modern flattened sense. It means the woman who rules the household space, the mistress of the farm, the keeper of order. Have you ever thought about how much power can live inside a routine, locking a chest, counting stores, deciding who gets the finer wool in winter and who gets the rougher cloak? These do not look dramatic from the outside, yet they are the difference between survival and hunger. Ragnhild knows how much dried fish remains from autumn. She knows which cow is likely to calve early, which servant has been stealing butter, which neighbour can be trusted with a loan of barley, and which cannot. She may not sail with the ship, but she commands the stead that gives the ship a reason to exist. Think about that the next time modern life teaches you to separate public power from private labour, as if the work of maintaining a home were somehow less historical, less decisive. In the Viking world, the household was not a backdrop. It was the engine, and when men were absent, sometimes for months, sometimes for years, women could oversee property, direct labourers, and act with striking authority inside the family economy. This was not equality in a modern sense, and it was not freedom without limits. Patriarchal expectations still existed. Marriages were still strategic, and violence was never far away. But within that world, responsibility could gather heavily around a woman's shoulders. You can almost hear it in the evening quiet, after the last bowl has been set aside, when she sits on the bed platform and listens to the weather change. The children are finally asleep. The fire settles. Outside, one dog gives a low bark. She has made 100 decisions without anyone praising them, and tomorrow she will make 100 more. There is something deeply human in that kind of invisible strength, something almost unbearably tender. And it becomes even more astonishing when you realize that the farm itself depended not only on food and order, but on a craft so vast, so time-consuming, and so essential that without it many ships would never have left at all. Let us step closer to the loom, because the story of Viking women is also the story of thread. Picture an Icelandic farm around the year 980. The light is pale, the wind presses at the walls. A woman named Thora stands before an upright warp-weighted loom, its hanging threads stretched like a curtain of pale hair. At the bottom dangle loom weights of stone or clay, steadying the warp with their pull. Her hands move with patient rhythm, passing weft through warp, beating the cloth into place. The sound is soft and repetitive, almost hypnotic. Tap, draw. Tighten, tap again. It is the kind of sound that could fill an entire childhood. In Old Norse, the word vathmal referred to a homespun woolen cloth so important that in medieval Iceland it could function almost like currency. Cloth could pay rents, settle obligations, and measure value. And there is another quiet surprise for you. The famous Viking sail, the thing we imagine bursting with adventure, often began here, in rooms like this, under the care of women's labour. Some estimates suggest a single large wool sail could require the fleece of many dozens, even up to around 200 sheep over time, along with thousands of hours of work to clean, spin, weave, and finish. Imagine that for a moment. A voyage that looks heroic on the sea may actually begin in lanolin-scented wool caught under a woman's fingernails. Have you ever thought about how many hidden hands lie behind any grand departure? Behind every modern flight, every road trip, every package on your doorstep, there is a chain of invisible labour. The Viking world was no different. Thora carded wool in winter darkness. She spun yarn with a drop spindle while watching a pot simmer. She dyed cloth with plants, perhaps woad for blue tones, madder for reddish hues, though brighter dyes were costly and varied by region. Her fingers might crack in the cold, her back might ache from standing, yet the cloth had to come. Clothes, blankets, sails, trade goods, all of it. Textiles were not decorative extras, they were infrastructure. And because cloth decays more easily than iron or stone, whole empires of labour disappear more easily from history's surface. That is one reason these women can seem so ghost-like to us now. But if you slow down enough, they return. You see the lint on the air. You smell wet wool drying by the hearth. You hear a child asking when the ship will come home, and no one answering right away. There is a particular kind of loneliness in repetitive work, but also a kind of dignity. Row after row, thread after thread, she is making continuity itself. Something to wear, something to sell, something to carry men away across the sea and, if luck allows, carry them back again. And yet cloth and keys were only part of what these women held together, because the hardest burden was often not material at all. It was uncertainty, that long cold companion waiting by the shore. So now let us leave the loom and walk down toward the water in your mind. It is early spring in coastal Denmark, perhaps around 1020. The thaw has begun and the shoreline is all mud, reeds, gull cries and the taste of salt on the air. A woman named Astrid stands looking over the grey water with a child wrapped against her side. Somewhere beyond that horizon is a husband, brother, or son. Maybe he went raiding west. Maybe he sailed east along the river routes toward markets in the lands of the Rus. Maybe he promised to be back before the first hay cutting, and maybe promises on the sea have a way of thinning out in the wind. The word Viking itself likely comes from Old Norse Vikinga, or going on a Viking, often meaning an overseas expedition or raiding journey. Notice how the word centers the journey, the movement, the leaving. But what word, then, holds the person who remains? History is less generous there. The waiting is harder to name. Have you ever noticed that the people who stay are often expected to stay silent too? Yet Norse women were not always powerless in law or custom. In some Scandinavian and Icelandic legal traditions, women could inherit property under certain conditions, request divorce, and reclaim dowry rights. The details varied by place and status, and everyday reality was never as tidy as law codes. Still, the idea matters. A woman abandoned, abused, or left without support was not always trapped without recourse. Some saga stories, though written down later and shaped by storytelling, preserve the memory of formidable women who spoke sharply, managed estates, and defended family honor with unnerving clarity. At the same time, let us not soften the pain. News traveled slowly. Death could go unconfirmed for years. A ship lost in the North Sea left no neat ending, only absence. In Sweden, many runestones from the 11th century were raised in memory of men who died abroad. Those stones, carved with serpentine lines and careful names, tell you something heartbreaking. Behind each memorial stands a household that had to absorb the blow. A widow, a mother, a sister, a daughter old enough to understand that someone is not coming home. You can almost feel Astrid's hand resting on weathered wood as she hears that another ship has returned, but not his. Think about that next time you complain gently about an unanswered message or a delayed arrival. Waiting is ancient. The human heart has always kept strange calendars, and still life insisted on moving. Nets needed mending, bread needed baking, animals needed tending. Faith, too, was changing around them, as old pagan traditions met Christianity across the north. A woman might wear a Thor's hammer pendant in one generation and a cross in the next, or even both worlds at once in memory and habit. She might light a lamp, whisper a prayer, and trust whatever power was listening. There is something profoundly moving in that image, not because it is grand, but because it is familiar. The effort to keep going while not knowing, the effort to hold a family in the space between hope and grief, And if the sea was the place where stories became legend, the hearth was the place where those legends were survived. And that, more than anything, is the thread I keep coming back to tonight. Not the splash of oars or the flash of a blade, but the steady endurance of the women whose lives were measured less by conquest than by continuation. The thing that moves me most looking back is how little of their emotional world was carved into monuments, and yet how much of human history depends on people exactly like them. The woman who rises first, the woman who knows where the good linen is stored, the woman who keeps one ear on the baby, one ear on the storm, and one part of her heart permanently turned toward the road, or the river, or the sea. If you gather together all the things we have passed tonight, the keys at the belt, the loom threads under the fingers, the legal rights imperfectly held, the salt-edged waiting by the shore, what you begin to see is not a footnote to the Viking Age, but one of its deepest foundations. Without these women, the farm fails. Without the farm, the ship is not provisioned. Without the cloth, the sail is not raised. Without the memory, the dead are not named. Without the one who remains, the one who leaves becomes a story with nowhere to return. And maybe that is the larger human theme quietly glowing beneath all of this. Across centuries, across languages, across very different worlds, people have always built history in two directions at once. Some move outward, some hold inward, some go, some stay. Both are costly, both matter. I think there is comfort in that, especially at night, when your own life may feel made of small repeated acts that no saga will ever record. The dishes washed, the text sent, the rent remembered, the door checked twice before bed. These are not lesser things. They are the hidden architecture of survival. So if you are someone who keeps things together, often quietly, often without applause, I hope this old northern story reaches you like a warm hand on the shoulder. Thank you for being here with me tonight and for sharing this little stretch of time across the dark. If you want to, tell me in the comments which part stayed with you most, or whether you think you would have preferred the uncertain horizon of the ship or the heavier silence of the home left behind. And if this helped you slow down, you can leave a like. Subscribe for more gentle journeys into the past, and come back next time, because in our next sleepy wander through history, we may step into another forgotten room, another strange ordinary life that turned out to hold up an entire world. Until then, friend, let the fire burn low, let the wind move farther away, and may your night be safe, soft, and deeply good. Good night.